All right. Pleasure to be here today. My name is Kevin. I'm the CEO and founder of Hyasynth. We're a biotechnology company based out of Montreal. My background's originally in biochemistry, so you might hear a bit of like technical stuff from me. But I'm super excited to share like where we're at and what we're doing, and a whole lot about the space of cannabinoids and how they are made and how we are really revolutionizing this whole space. So, first of all, very briefly, the cannabinoids, if you're not familiar, are most commonly known as the active compounds for cannabis. But of course, your body has had an endocannabinoid system, which is like the system in your body that naturally reacts to these compounds. And it's such an interesting wave in healthcare right now because there's so many linkages between the endocannabinoid system and different parts of your health and your body. Three that I've named here are skincare, which I'll talk a bit more about later. Sleep is extremely important as well, and it's especially in COVID related disruptions of sleep is one of the latest things that I've heard of in the cannabinoid space. And then a whole lot of people are using CBD as a pain management, and a whole lot. So immense potential market, really another wave of healthcare that's totally unique and on its own, but really dependent on these ingredients, on the cannabinoids, on CBD itself. But there's a big problem in this industry, despite the immense human health potential, which is that if you are trying to produce CBD from cannabis, this is going to emit 1,000 times more CO2 equivalents than if you were producing a kilogram. And you might argue that, well, if, there's not much CBD that is to be made and so on, but actually CBD production in the US, you could estimate as being above pork production in terms of the absolute amount of CO2 being emitted. So we're looking at a immense, global healthcare opportunity, but that's also being faced with a planetary health issue as well. And that's reason number one. A lot of, cannabis is not going to be the suitable way of producing this stuff. Reason number two is that the quality of the cannabinoid products coming from cannabis are also very problematic. So this is a study done by the FDA a few years ago where they basically took a bunch of CBD parts off the shelves and found that more than half of them basically did not have CBD in them, or they had some THC in them as a contaminant, which is a big deal. Or maybe they had even more CBD than it was labeled. So totally unacceptable in the realm of, anything that you're putting on your skin or putting in your body, whether it's pharmaceutical or therapeutic or for food, whatever it is, it's crazy. And this all because, people are relying on growing cannabis to get this stuff out. So there has to be a better way. And this is where we come in. Uh, we are here to produce cannabinoids using engineered yeast instead of growing cannabis. And this is like very similar in terms of analogy to Genentech, where, back in the 1970s, people needed insulin to treat diabetes, but the only source was for these like pig pancreas, which they had to mash up, very like messy, dirty, energy intensive process. And so Genentech created an engineered bacteria, which is how you produce human insulin today. And that's what most people rely on. So for us, we're doing the same thing. We're moving from cannabis, which is a dirty, energy intensive, very difficult process to make these things, over to engineered yeast, which is the clean, large scale way that we use to produce actually like, so many of our food ingredients and our healthcare ingredients, and all kinds of different things. And really opening up the door for us to be able to treat a wider range of applications than the ones that, can be addressed just using cannabis. So, what we do as a company, what we've done for the past 8 years is basically creating these strains of yeast. And there's a whole lot of genetic engineering technical stuff that I can get into. But the outcome is that we have a yeast strain that now produces more CBD than in cannabis plant. And that's almost like, pound for pound exactly. And that's one of the interesting, like, cool facts about the work that we've done in the past while. Except of course, for it to grow yeast, it grows in 11 days instead of 3 months of time to grow a cannabis plant. And because we use fermentation as a process, unlike synthetic chemistry, let's say, we're really aiming at this being a generic process that can be outsourced easily to fermentation facilities anywhere in the world. And that's one of the big highlights for us, making sure that Our cost of goods is tied to like simple feedstocks, but the fermentation process is generic and easy to replicate, and then enabling us to scale as quickly as possible, and ultimately make a smoothie available anywhere in the world. So that's a bit of our tech platform. And now I'm going to talk a bit more about our first product. And this is like important to me because so many biotech platforms out there. It's important that these companies actually make real products in the end. And so this is where we're at. We are the first company in the world to have a fermentation derived CBD isolate available for purchase, or soon available for purchase in a lot of different places. But we're the only one with this technology. And this is meant to be just an ingredient for companies to purchase from us and incorporate into their own products. And really addresses that need where companies are aware of the applications of CBD, but they can't really source it reliably, or they're sourcing from a cannabis producer, which has been, too expensive or high risk, or maybe a synthetic chemistry producer, which then you have a synthetic chemistry, language around your products. And also a question of how large scale that they can produce for you, and the cost of that too. And the focal point of this first ingredient that we've made is in skincare. So that it's a science-backed, proven application of CBD. There are plenty of skincare companies that are aware of the applications of CBD in skincare, but have a really hard time sourcing them. And so we're really hitting that nail on the head of having like a clear definition of the application of this stuff, who is really looking for it, and how we can sell it to them and what they're looking for. Um, Briefly on our go-to-market strategy, we've also mapped out like where exactly does it make sense to take this product to the market. And there's a lot of talk in the US about CBD being sort of hemp, but having that be a compressed market and so on. But that's still target for us, but a little bit further down the line in 2020. Where we're at now is that there's markets like Europe and Japan where the needs for regulation for quality are much higher. And so there's a lot less, compression there, and also, but still the same kind of demand where people want to use CBD in their products, but they have trouble sustaining it. And so these are both in Europe, of course, $2.67 billion market, in Japan, $2.12 billion market. Some of the bigger cosmetics and personal care markets in the world that are looking for this stuff, but can't get it from anywhere else. And so that's where we're able to make our product market fit work, and we're able to drive higher margins. And so we've done our pre-sales work now, driving up to over $5 million in demand for our products at a really high margin. Well over 1,000 kilograms of volume in demand right now that we're preparing our manufacturing to deliver on, and really hitting those customer pain points of purity, environmentally friendly, and just affordability, being able to buy this stuff at a reasonable price compared to other ways of sourcing it. And lastly, but not least, this is where we're at. We're at this inflection point of being an R&D company going to commercial scale in the middle of a new financing round. We have a new lead investor, but we're happy with where we're at and where we're going to go because we've like over the years, I've built this management team that has built the types of multiple companies that have over $1 billion transaction experience. So we know that we have a team that can deliver on this stuff. We have the technical validation from one of the largest investors in life sciences in the world, that's invested in all kinds of like food tech and ag tech and biotech companies. We were the first company to actually close a strategic investment in the biosynthesis space for cannabinoids with Organogram in 2018. And very soon we will be the world leader in manufacturing capacity for fermentation dried CBD. And that's something that we'll talk a lot more about later on as we get closer to that deal being closed, or that I happen to chat with people privately, of course, as well. So in summary, we're a biotech company that is producing CBD using fermentation, which is a revolutionary ingredient for all kinds of applications in human health, but really focusing on the highest value and the highest volume opportunities for ourselves. And that's how we're going to drive this company's growth and ultimately exit. We have the team to deliver on that. And ultimately, we're the leader in this space when it comes to the technology, the patents around this technology, and also the ability to actually produce CBD, but also a lot of other cannabinoids. That's a little thing at the end. Where we headed is a bit beyond just CBD as an ingredient, but always happy to chat more about that. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate it. I know at the end of the presentation, you said to talk about it privately, but I'm just curious, is the long goal for you guys to bring manufacturing in-house, or is this you intend to work with partners from different parts of the world, and then you would build a relationship and then go to market together, or is this something you just license out the technology and then give it to a bigger customer?
More likely where we are involved heavily on the sales side. So we could think about building our manufacturing facilities. There's of course equations to draw about the capital expense and return on that we can draw at any time for each market that we're interested in. But I think the key thing for us is not to be so hands off. We're not just going to hand a license over to somebody else and let them do their thing. We kind of want to be a bit more involved where we control our sales, we control the margins, we control the way the product looks in customers' hands. And that being an important part of what drives, profitability and scale and growth.
It makes sense. And you are obviously in an interesting category that has, for I think, for at least the investor community, some of those are allowed to invest in, products that are related to cannabis. Some are not. What kind of regulations do you run into creating cannabinoids? Is this something that is a little bit more challenging hurdle, and this is a type of existential threat that you see in the future with expanding to different markets, or is it because you have been able to build a solution or system that creates a pure CBD isolate that you have run into less and less problems?
Um, Overall, less than the problems. It's actually, we've been super thorough about regulatory analysis, making sure that we have like all our ducks in a row for each market we want to enter. Being involved in like government processes for like regulations around cannabinoids, and a whole lot of that in Canada. But in the end, like it comes down to a much simpler picture where like we're producing CBD, we're not producing THC, which is usually narcotic, we're not producing cannabis, which is also considered narcotic. And so that opened a lot of doors and also creates a lot of clarity for regulators, or quality assurance people, where it's just like, this is what we're making. It's nothing else. There's no potential for anything else to be there, and therefore it's a lot more clear in terms of how we get through regulations. There's even some processes where a lot of cannabis producers, especially in Europe, are being held up for regulations, whereas companies a bit more like ours, who are doing chemical synthesis, have a more consistent process that are being allowed more through these processes. And that's a bit of like kind of nuanced stuff that we can get into. But it boils down to being just like, yeah, consistency of the product, good quality, and a much simpler regulatory picture.
Awesome, wonderful. And then last question: uh, working using your process of fermentation, and then working with different manufacturing partners. For you guys, is it challenging at all to scale up the production of whether it's creating the CBD or other cannabinoids uh, as you get to larger scales, or is for you, have you kind of gone through that process, and or is the technology allow you to easily scale up and there's not as many challenges as you get to different scales?
So if I said it wasn't challenging, it'd be lying, or for at least people in the audience would start laughing or something like that. I think there's plenty of challenge to the scale up. Something we've always been aware of, and having people who have found it, by technology companies like ours on our advisory board, we know that there's like huge amounts of risk to scale up. So in the end, we prepare ourselves in the right way. We hired the right kinds of advisors, ran our process and experiments in a number of kind of ways, like know it can scale. And actually, as of this year, like we started to do that outsourced scale up work and had other people look at our process from the manufacturing side and tell us like, okay, data looks good, you can scale, and process wise is definitely here that can't be replicated at larger scales. Everything is pointing to like green lights as far as our scale up journey. But that was really from, design from the ground up, like making sure that we're aware of exactly what the challenges are, making sure that we're able to address them. And ultimately the big part of like our story and growth as a company is just like making sure that we can scale. We want to grow.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Kevin.